There we go. I think we're live. Welcome to anybody who's there. Welcome to Kestrel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having me.
and I guess like while people are just jumping in, because I know there's a bit of a delay, do you want to just start by telling us a bit about yourself and how you became interested in conscious fashion?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess during college, I studied global studies and international journalism. And so I learned a lot about how a product or an idea or a person, how they move around the world and how they impact different things along the way and vice versa. And so after I graduated, I was kind of in this state where I just wanted to do something related to fair trade. That was something that made sense to me. But besides that, I had no idea. And so I kind of moved home to small town Wisconsin. It was like, what am I doing with my life? And my mom got a catalog from a company called Fair Indigo. And at the time, they were kind of new to the scene in the US, being a fair trade fashion company. And so I looked at the catalog and I was like, this is my thing. So I need to figure out how to get into it. And I started researching and I found People Tree. And then I decided that I was going to intern with them however possible. So I literally emailed them every week and I was like, hey, can I just check in on that internship? You know, did you fill it yet? And when I finally did get the internship, I showed up and everyone thought I was the crazy American girl. So they realized that I just really wanted to learn from them once I got there. And so I had the chance to work with Safia Mini and with their PR manager at the time, Anthony Waller. And that was just kind of my first introduction to the world. And from there, I just knew I had to keep being part of it because at the time, that was probably 11 or so years ago. At the time, it really wasn't a discussion in the US. It was really small as far as who was talking about it. So just in that amount of time to see how much it's transformed, to me, is impressive.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's also such a great story because it kind of shows that persistence pays off. So if you like really want something, you can just keep pushing for
Sometimes.
it. That's awesome though. So this is great. There's people here saying hi in the chat. So hi everybody who's joining us. Now, if you guys don't know, I'm sure you guys know, but Kestrel's the host of the podcast Conscious Chatter, which is a super inspiring podcast. I learned so much. I love the stories that you share. And why did you decide to do a podcast instead of like a blog or something else like that?
Yeah. Well, it started with a blog, and I was trying to share people's stories as far as the cool things they're doing and also what they were wearing. And I have a friend who has a company called Be Kind Vibes, and it's a hemp organic cotton t-shirt company. And he is really into the conversation. And so he's like, Kes, this is, I guess, about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half ago. He's like, Kes, why don't you start a podcast? I can't find any podcasts that are talking about, this conversation. He had been searching sustainable fashion podcasts and wasn't finding it. And so I was like, well, that's a cool idea, but I have literally no idea how to make a podcast. I worked at a radio station in college, but that's not a podcast. So I kind of, it planted a seed and I kept thinking about it and wonder if I can pull this off. Started reading blogs about it, like learning a little bit more about podcasting. And then I just bought a microphone and started it. And as you can tell, if you listen to the first couple episodes, the sound quality is horrible because I did not know what I was doing yet. But from that point on, I've learned all of those details. And I've just been really impressed by how many people are interested in the conversation and how audio seems to be a unique way to kind of capture attention. And maybe it's a little less intimidating to kind of join the conversation and learn as it works for you.
Yeah, and it's nice to I think it's nice to hear things in people's own words instead of maybe like a written interview. It's really nice to hear what people have to say about things and kind of how they, do you find it's a different way of storytelling when it comes to audio versus like writing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times with writing, you have to give so much more context to kind of like frame something up, whereas a lot more things can kind of build upon each other in a conversation between two people. So you're not by yourself trying to build up all the context. And also the conversation can lead in so many different directions that you wouldn't have expected or planned on, which to me is the most powerful, because that's when everyone learns. That's when I learn the most. Like, I always have an overview for the episodes, but when the guest takes me down a different road, I'm like, this is great. Now I'm learning something new too.
Yeah, that's great. And so we have a quick question already in the chat, which I do want to clear up. So someone asked, is the podcast on iTunes? So where can people listen to it?
Absolutely. It's on iTunes. Yeah, you can just search Conscious Chatter. And it's also on Google Play. It's also on Stitcher. It's on basically every podcast app out there. I'm working on getting it on Spotify, but it's not there yet.
Awesome. And for all you guys in the chat, I'm going to give a little thank you so much. Like Dre, Ali, Drew, Amy, hi, everybody. If you guys have any questions throughout, just throw them in the chat and we will try to get to them. Hey, there's people from California, from Scotland. That's
awesome.
So cool. I think that's something that you've probably noticed as well, where it's so different now that you can have these conversations across the world, which I personally think is really exciting.
Yeah, I love that.
Everywhere.
Totally. And it's like, this is one of the things that keeps coming up lately in conversations is, you know, why are we all trying to kind of recreate the wheel when it comes to this industry? Because there's people innovating in it all over the world. Like, why are we not collaborating more? And I think that we need to talk to each other as much as possible so we can build upon what everyone else is doing and not become competitive about it, but like keep growing the industry and keep innovating.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. And do you think, like, in your opinion, that there is a lot of collaboration when it comes to, I guess, the sustainable, ethical fashion world, or is it fairly competitive?
I think it's a combination. I mean, I think that it's becoming more collaborative. That seems to be a trend. You know, when I've had people guests on the show, like from Timberland, and trying to think of another one from like Cradle to Cradle Institute, they're talking a lot about collaboration. And I guess for me, when you hear big brands, Eileen Fisher as well, like all of these teams are really talking about collaboration and they're trying to work together. And, you know, Patagonia, even with their fair trade certified factories, they're trying to have it open source factories so other people can chime in and then join their factories instead of having to do all of the work that Patagonia did to set up those factories. So I think there's a trend. I hope that it continues because I think fashion in general is not known to be very collaborative. It's known to be quite secretive and mysterious and not really into sharing information. So I know for young designers, I've had people come to me and say, you know, I've been asking different people for ideas and if they can share kind of things that I'm trying to do as far as starting a brand. And I think they get both extremes. They get people that totally don't want to talk to them and they get people that are open to share. So I think it's a combination, but I feel like it's definitely trending toward collaboration. And I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense to me, because if we're going to change things, like it's going to change faster if we all work together.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think especially when it comes to needing new technology in a lot of cases, you know, like we need better recycling technology. We need better just supply chain systems and stuff, especially when it comes to like fully fair trade supply chains and products. And it's nice to see people that are willing to share that information. You know, it's not like, oh, this factory is like my factory and I only want, you know, like me to be able to use it, and people that are willing to bring in small designers, bring in other brands, allow them to use this technology and this like system that they already have in place. And I think that's so exciting. And I hope that we see more of that. But of course, it's difficult to do as a brand too, to just sort of, you know, put out everything that you've been working on. But I wanted to jump back quickly to something you said earlier about like how much you've learned doing this. And I'm curious if your perception, I guess, of the industry has changed since you've been doing the podcast, or even since you started your blog?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the industry is constantly changing. So my perception of it is definitely also changing. The industry is changing really fast right now. And, you know, there's a trend toward jumping into this conversation now. You know, all the big brands have some sort of CSR team. If they don't, then they're really far behind. But then I guess it's getting more detail oriented. So it used to be kind of like really big picture when you talk about this industry. And now we're able to like get down and deeper into all these other layers and talk about what that means. And it's like no one has the answers because this hasn't been really addressed in the past. Like fashion started as something simple, and then it evolved into this massive mess of an industry, which is, you know, so disconnected, that has so many extremely long supply chains. So big companies can't track their own supply chain. So I think that it's changed so much that it's kind of hard to know how my perception has changed. But I guess right now I do feel that that we're in a good place and there's more and more people coming to the table. But then it's at the same time, as a consumer, it can be more complicated and almost like more overwhelming because there are all these brands coming out being like, I'm an eco-fashion brand, or I'm, you know, and then as a consumer, then you have to know all these questions to ask, and that's complicated. And everyone's not as much of an obsessed person like me about the industry, and they shouldn't have to be. So I think it gets complicated for consumers.
Yeah, for sure. I know that like a huge question I get all the time is like, how do I tell if a brand is greenwashing, or like, how can you tell if a brand is being authentic? And like, that is so hard, especially when being sustainable and like, it's a bit trendy. I hate to use that word, but you know, it's kind of, there's so many brands that are coming out with organic products, and it's like, how do you know if they're actually serious about this? So I'm curious, like if you have any tips about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated, but the more you have a personal connection to a brand, I think the better off you are because you're learning directly from them. I find that if I email a brand about a question and I don't hear anything back, then it's kind of like, all right, well, maybe that's a red flag for me. So I think the more you can have a personal connection, the more that people will respond to you. I send Instagram messages to people all the time, like brands, like, can you tell me about this? Can you tell me about that? And I think that open transparency says a lot for me. Mm-hmm. So if a brand responds and is happy to talk about it, I think that's huge. As far as other tips, I would say ask your friends too, because your friends might have a personal connection to a brand. You can read the websites and you can read their, you know, about and their environmental policy or their human right policy, kind of those pages on their sites. But that again can get really overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so you can watch for some labels. Labeling is also really complicated, but you can watch for like Fair Trade USA is a great label that's now available on clothes. But you can watch for organic cotton, but then there's all these other questions. It's not like there's one thing. So I think also as shoppers, it's helpful to think about, you know, what are the most important elements for you? What are you looking for? What really means something to you? And also not to think that you have to always check every single box, because mm-hmm. that's realistically, that's not necessarily even possible, because if a brand's creating a product, they're creating some sort of an impact.
Yeah, for sure. I always encourage people to decide what their like top priority is, start there, and then kind of like keep adding on things. And it's not about getting them all, but sort of like find one area to, I guess, focus on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So something that I love about your podcast is that you focus on telling positive stories. And I think that is really important when it comes to conversations around conscious fashion. And I'm curious if that was like a conscious decision on your part, or if you're just a really positive person and that was just kind of naturally how it went.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was necessarily intentional in the beginning. What I really wanted to set out to do was kind of break down different parts of the industry in an easy to understand way. So I tried to have really overarching topics and kind of start big. So we talked about water, we talked about cotton, and talking about like big topics, but bringing in an expert. And I guess naturally I'm drawn to the experts that are doing something really powerful and positive. I have been an optimist as far as this industry for years now, thinking that it's going to get better and, you know, feeling like there are changes on the horizon. And so I think it's kind of a combo. But I guess, you know, The True Cost, the documentary, which most people that have, a lot of people that have come into this conversation saw that and were like, whoa, I want to know more. I had no idea. Or, you know, this just brought a lot of things to the forefront that I want to learn more about. And Andrew Morgan did a great job telling the story about how the fashion industry is a mess. But then after that, sometimes you can feel a bit defeated and kind of like, now what do I do? And so I feel like the positive stories are the next step in kind of helping you keep moving and not feel totally paralyzed.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it can get incredibly overwhelming, and it almost seems like as soon as you discover one thing and then you do some research into that, you just kind of keep uncovering more and more and more information that just gets like, you have no idea where to look, you have no idea where to start. So yeah, I think I love your approach with that and just focusing on the and innovative and just cool things around sustainable fashion. So I want to quickly jump into the chat because somebody had a question about like contacting brands, what you mentioned, like getting in touch with people. And they said, so it's V Megan says, how do I contact big companies like Forever 21? It doesn't feel right to just boycott the brands. So, okay, sorry. I think she's asking like, how do I, like what to say to brands? And do you have a response to that at all?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, contacting bigger brands is tough. One great way to do it is if you join in on Fashion Revolution's initiative, because every year on April 24th, which I'm sure you've discussed on your channel, they get people together around the world to ask who made my clothes. And so I think that's a great opportunity because there's a lot of chatter around it at that time. And you can tag Forever 21 or whoever the brand might be, you can tag it in your Instagram or your social media and ask that question. But if you're also looking, you know, like you can go on LinkedIn and you can find companies and you can see if you have any connections. And, you know, I think it's about kind of just getting a little bit more creative sometimes. For me, I've contacted brands that way where you're like, okay, well, I have a mutual connection to this person. They might introduce me. And then suddenly you're having a conversation with someone at Forever 21. And also, if you go to a store, you can ask in store because the people that work there have a little bit more access than you might. And if you suggest something, they are supposed to be listening to the shoppers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great tips. And I think too, you can tell a lot by brands' responses. Like if it's a very just sort of generic, vague response, it's always nice to, like you can tell if brands actually know what's going on in their supply chain. To talk about storytelling and communication and how we talk about issues like this, because both on like in a public platform like what you're doing and also just on a personal level, kind of having conversations with your friends and your family. So I guess you have a background in journalism, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I studied global studies and international journalism.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, do you think, like, I guess, what's your opinion on storytelling and the idea of like using stories as a way to engage people in these conversations?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess it sounds so cliche because, you know, it's like 2 or 3 years ago was the year of the story, and it's become so much more just, it's another trend. Everyone's like, oh, well, it's storytelling and I'm a storyteller. But the reality is, if you look back at history, like, you know, you look back at oral history, everything is connected to story. Like our lives are connected to story. The way we communicate is associated with stories. And so the more we can find ways to connect with people through telling stories, like the more we can push this conversation further. And For me, I like to hear stories from other people. So I like to frame up like a general idea of a story, but then let other people tell their story about it, because I think really hearing personal stories helps people understand things. And you know, there's an organization called a Remake, and they're out of San Francisco, and they do a really good job of helping to tell stories about the women who make our clothes, because the number of women that make our clothes around the world is massive. And so they do a really good job of connecting you to actual people. And you can meet this woman and learn about her story. And, you know, it's kind of about breaking down those barriers, not just thinking about the garment workers or, you know, just thinking about the people in the supply chain, but thinking about actual humans. Like, this is a woman and this is her life, and she has these struggles, and, you know, you can relate to her in these ways because we're humans. And there's human experiences that can really connect us. So I guess for me, it's become, when I talk about it with friends, I feel like talking about what I'm wearing is the easiest way to bring it up. Because in the beginning of this journey, I was like the, you know, over the top extreme person that was just so upset about it. And I would be kind of like negative, and I'm like, don't you care? How do you not care? And that gets us nowhere. So I learned very quickly that was a bad approach. But now it's easiest for me to not push it on people. It's almost like if it comes up naturally, great. But I think it's important to not shut people out. And the more that we like make it an inclusive conversation where people feel welcomed into it, the better everyone's going to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there's sort of proven time and time again, just psychology, that if you feel attacked, you automatically want to like protect yourself, and you get defensive and you don't listen, and you sort of you just aren't open to hearing things. So it's not an effective way of talking if we're attacking people and putting other people down. And so I really liked what you said about taking the clothes that you're wearing and using that as a point to start a conversation. And I think that's such a cool way also to tie it in with this idea of like personal stories, where if you have something that's made by like a local brand, or it's made by an artisan cooperative or something like that, it's such a cool thing to be like, oh yeah, this was made by, you know, this kind of person, it's made of this sort of material. And so like, do you think that that is kind of one of the best ways that people can engage with each other?
I think it's a great way. And I think right now, timeliness, I mean, the next generation really does want to know more. You know, people want to know, like, I have this quote in front of me because I didn't want to botch it. But so in a recent survey of over 10,000 consumers from around the world, 78% said that it's somewhat or very important for a company to be transparent. So people want to know, like, they want to know the story, they want to know more about what's happening behind the scenes. So I guess it's stories are top of mind, even though we've been telling them for ages, but they're top of mind and people want to know what's going on behind the scenes. And then, like you're saying, if someone asks you, you know, oh, I love that dress, where did you get it? Then you have like this perfect opportunity to share something about the brand, or the fact that it's thrifted, or whatever it might be. You have that perfect opportunity, but then you also have an opportunity to feel almost like more empowered by the fact that the stories behind your clothes are reflecting who you are. So it's like you're able to then say something further about who you are to the world versus just the initial image.
Mm-hmm. So I would love to know if you have any brands that you think are doing a really good job in terms of how they are telling their own stories. And it kind of ties in with the question that we have in the chat from T-shirts and Jeans, who asks, who are some of your favorite to follow people or brands on Instagram?
Okay. There's so many now.
Yeah, it's almost overwhelming actually how many like cool new brands there are.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love what you're doing. It's really fun to follow you. There's another YouTuber called Ali Cherry who I've mentioned before. There's a woman named Dominique Drakeford, and she has a really cool website called Melanin ASS, like Melanin in Sustainable Style. So she's trying to bring women of color into the conversation further, because so often this is like very white woman conversation. Let's see, who else? I guess for me too, I like to find like the little small brands where I suddenly discover them and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So I do a lot of just scrolling through Instagram, finding a hashtag and seeing kind of where it leads me. There's some cool platforms that have been popping up, like a company has a lot of cool brands and they're doing really cool photo shoots. Because for me too, I think so often we're missing still the best image possible in this industry. Like we need to get better as far as the images go, as far as the way that the styling is done, as far as like what it looks like to the consumer. And it's definitely gotten far better, but I think that we still need to keep working on that, because it needs to compete on a fashion level first and then have this really great story behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'd love to know too, because you've been kind of in this for so long, how obviously things have changed, and the idea that like sustainable fashion is all just hemp clothes, that's changing. But do you still think that there are stigmas around sustainable fashion and kind of the aesthetic that goes along with that?
Yeah, I think there still are. And maybe it's part of some of our own problem, because we keep perpetuating that, being like, it's not like what you would think. And, you know, in conversations, we might say, you know, it's not like a hemp sack anymore. And maybe we're almost like holding on to it as a reference and in our conversations. So that might be part of the problem. But I think there's a stigma around that. There's also massive stigma around price point. And that's actually in one of my upcoming podcasts, I talk about that with my guests. But, you know, price point is definitely going to be higher than fast fashion brands, because people are actually being paid. And you know, fabrics that are organic or recycled, they're generally cost a bit more than a conventional material. So I think that's a bit of a struggle too when it comes to the stigmas. But at the same time, there's brands out there that are trying to bring that price down, and they're taking a cut from their margins in order to try to change it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's also interesting, I think, to see these different business models that are kind of coming up as well, that are either like renting clothes or doing things like, I just discovered Love Justly recently, where they're basically like selling overstock products and doing, I don't know, I guess I'm excited to see how people are changing the fashion business models and offering other things around sustainable fashion as well. And I guess with price point, it's obviously always going to be an issue, because like you said, it's always going to cost more. But it's also exciting to see people approaching it in different ways, or, you know, through capsule wardrobes, like buying less clothing, or really focusing on like vintage and secondhand and that kind of thing. I guess I didn't really have a question in there, just sort of like how do you see the industry changing and evolving based on the people that you've talked to? Like, do you see a lot of different innovation around stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of innovation going on right now. I think there's kind of two schools of thought right now. One is we need to totally break the system. Like the fashion system does not work right now, which if you read Business of Fashion, it's like every day there's some other mess that happened, because fashion industry is hurting right now. But then the other school of thought is like, let's work within the system and kind of adjust and tweak and keep it going as it is, but just make edits to it so it's better. So I think those are very extreme different thoughts. I spoke with Stefan Siegel of Not Just a Label, and he has a platform that brings together independent designers from around the world. And his mindset is like, the system has to break. Like we need to break the system totally and rebuild it, which I think is very interesting. But then you have brands like Prana or Patagonia, and they're not really necessarily breaking the system. They're just kind of working within the system and trying to make it better. So I guess those are the two big different kind of approaches that I see right now. And I go back and forth depending on the week on which one seems to make more sense to me. And I think, the reality is both are necessary. So the whole fashion system isn't going to break right away. It may be a gradual process. And either way, we need to keep bettering the system that we have right now instead of just ignoring it. So I think it's kind of a combined effort.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that overall, in terms of like consumer attitudes, do you think, because, okay, something that I always feel like, I talk to so many people that are already thinking about fashion and where their clothes are coming from and what they're made out of and things like that. And then I'll be like walking down the high street and see like just so many people buying, with shopping bags all over their arms and just like these shops completely full of people. And then I wonder, like, if I'm just in this tiny little echo chamber, like, and I'm curious, like, from your perspective and like where you live in the US and stuff, like, do you think there is a shift overall in terms of what people are thinking or people starting to think about things, or there's still a long, long way to go?
I think we still live in a small bubble compared to like the larger population. And it's a privileged bubble. The fact that we can even think about this and talk about it is privileged. But I think it's changing. I absolutely think it's changing. And I think it's getting to a better place. If you just think about media and the conversations that were happening around this industry, like 5-6 years ago, there was hardly anything out there. You could go and you could get content from Ecoterre, like specific websites that wrote about sustainable fashion. Mm-hmm. But there weren't articles in the Huffington Post and in the New York Times. Like the big guys weren't necessarily talking about it on a regular basis. And you see it being addressed now. And I guess for me, that's one really good start, because I think what the media says is a form of education to, the larger population. And so that's a good step. And I also think that there's going to be a gradual progression between like what you want to do versus what you actually do. It's not like, oh, cool, I want to support better brands. Instantly, you're doing that. I mean, there's a learning curve, and it takes time to kind of like reformat the systems that you have and the way that you act and the way you interact with shopping. And it's not going to happen overnight. So I think we also have to be patient, which is definitely not my strong quality, but I always am like, you have to remember that, because it's changing human behavior is not something that happens really fast.
So what do you think is a good starting point for people that are just getting into learning about, I guess, conscious fashion?
I mean, I think it's a great way to get into it is to watch YouTube channels and like listen to podcasts. I mean, that's like totally tooting our own horns, but the reality is that's a good way to just kind of like be able to tune into it, get some information. If you feel overwhelmed, just turn it off and, take a break from it. Find people that you relate to, like find bloggers that you relate to. I mean, there's the Ethical Writers Coalition, there's other blogging networks that are specific to sustainable fashion. And you can find lists of bloggers there. Find someone who has a style that you like and follow them, because maybe you're not going to like every brand that they post about or everything that they're saying, but you might be able to relate to them a bit in style and kind of take a couple of tidbits along the way.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. So this is an interesting question, but I think it's kind of fun. So first of all, I guess I should establish that I think based on what I've heard from your podcast, that we have very different closets, because I have a very minimal like capsule wardrobe, and I know that you have, I think, like a pretty good array of clothes, and you love style and changing up your style and stuff, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't have a huge wardrobe. I just use things a lot of different ways. I mean, I live in a very small house with 2 dogs and my boyfriend. So we don't have a lot of space. I have half of the closet, but I probably have more things than you. I'm like between like liking the idea of minimalism, but never achieving it because I like clothes too much.
But that's, I mean, I think your style, that's actually amazing to hear because I think your style is amazing and you always have such interesting and cool outfits. But so I wanted to kind of jump into that and like, do you think that when it comes to, I guess, expressing your style, that it's more difficult if you're trying to shop consciously, or do you find that you actually find more unique and interesting pieces?
I personally think you find more unique and interesting pieces. And also, someone I had on the podcast, Timo Rissanen, who's a zero waste designer and professor, he brought up this quote and reminded me of it. And he said, you know, creativity comes with constraints. And I think that's so true. And for me, like having less options means I have to get more innovative. And so let's say I only have 5 dresses that are like my favorite dresses and they're in my closet. I only have those options to work with. So I'm not going to be able to wear a different outfit every single day. I'm going to take those and like layer things with them and, you know, different accessories, different shoes. Like, I guess for me, having less options actually has helped me be more creative.
Oh, that's so cool to hear, especially because I think like okay, and so I guess sort of along those lines, like, do you feel that you can fully express your style? Because I think that's something that people worry about when they're sort of switching or changing and thinking more about their clothes, that they're not going to be able to totally express that. And having such like a cool and unique style, do you feel like you can totally fully express your style?
Yeah, I don't feel hindered at all when it comes to that. There's one thing I still have struggle finding that I actually love, which is underwear. So if anyone has their favorite brands, you can tell me because I've tried so many and I still don't like them. But that's maybe too much information. But other than that, like I don't feel like I have any problem when it comes to expressing myself. I feel like going to thrift stores, going to estate sales, like there's so many opportunities to find these unique gems. And for me, I've never been a fan of looking like everyone else. I was always the weirdo kid in school that had crazy outfits on, and people are like, where did you come from? Like in a small town in the Midwest. But it's just, I love it. It's kind of like my form of expression. It's my form of art, is like putting together a composition of an outfit. And I love it. And I think it's also key if you're thinking about, you know, shifting your wardrobe or, you know, becoming more conscious about what you're buying, you don't have to do it all at the same time. Like if you have a closet already, if you're thinking about this, so you can use those things and just like gradually shift over. I don't think it's ever necessarily a good idea to just like dump everything and start fresh. It's a process.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, just yeah, like start with kind of one thing that you need and slowly incorporating. And also, yeah, I think that's a good point to make too, because some people think that, you know, if they're gonna go down this path, that they need to sort of hit reset and totally change their wardrobe. But like I have pieces for like 6, 7, 8 years. Like they're not from sustainable brands, they're not secondhand, but that doesn't mean you have to get rid of them. It's just like keeping your clothes and caring for them, I think, is also a really important part of just fashion.
And there's stories behind them. So like if you have a piece and you got it at maybe like a fast fashion brand years ago or whatever it is, or maybe you got it at a fast fashion brand like last month, but if it has stories attached to it, if it means something to you, if it's something that like really connects to you, and when you see it in your closet, you remember things associated with it. I think that's powerful. And, you know, that's one of the things that we need to keep working on, is like building that connection with our clothes and caring about them, not just like throwing them in the corner and not caring about them because you could just go buy another one for $3 the next day. Like really take care of them and love them.
So jumping back into the chat, Ali says that she loves your earrings. Ashlyn agrees that undergarments are a challenge. And Peach Pathfinder says that they really like Pansy Co. from Oakland for organic cotton underwear. And also,
Cool.
Persona Kokera, I'm probably mispronouncing your username, I'm sorry. It says, please talk about pajamas and how many do you have? Do you have a lot of pajamas?
Great question. I've never really thought about it. I I don't have a lot of pajamas. I have one pair of thrifted like silk pants that my mom got for me. She thrifted when she was traveling in Hawaii, and I probably wear those majority of nights. I have one pair of sweatpants that I always like wearing pants to bed because I get cold. The other pair of pants I have is from Seamly, which is a really cool brand based out of Colorado. She's kind of shifted her home base. I think she's in LA now. Really comfy, and she uses all dead stock materials.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I basically just sleep in old t-shirts usually.
Yes, and combined with old t-shirts. Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm not necessarily like the sexy outfit for sleep.
Neither am I. It's just like old ratty holy shirts. But they're so soft and comfortable. Yeah.
Exactly.
So jumping, I guess, okay. So when we talk about closets and I guess building this closet that reflects both your style and your values, I think that's sort of the ultimate goal, right? Is like finding those pieces that you can really combine both of them. But obviously it's a struggle. Like it's difficult to find pieces and to find brands. So I guess like in your experience with all these brands doing really interesting and unique things, do you think that like how does a customer find out what a brand is doing or even find these brands? Because I think it can be so hard when you just see a name or you just see a website to really actually get that information and get that story behind it. So for someone that's just looking online, like how can they find that out?
I think maybe a good starting point is offline, because it's, for me at least, it's nice to connect with who's local in the community doing positive things. So like, for instance, someone mentioned these earrings. They're by a brand called House Goods, and I live in San Diego, and the woman is a mom. She does this as like her source of income and has built this brand, and she's at a lot of the art shows and like the maker markets, and so I met her that way. And she just makes really cool earrings, and then I also know who she is and can kind of support her. So I think finding out what's going on locally, like is there a boutique that has local brands in it, or is there a maker's market or even farmers markets? A lot of times you can meet people doing cool things. So I think it's almost like easier to start that way, and then you're immediately getting a personal connection, which to me is the most rewarding, because then you're wearing it and you're like, oh yeah, my friend made this, and it just has something more connected about it, I guess.
Yeah, I love that so much. And it's so cool to like meet the person that also made the thing that you have and actually like talk to them. And it's a rare, like we're so disconnected from often the people who make our clothes and our products that it's really cool to like meet somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if from there you want to go online and search, I think a good way is to look at some of the great bloggers like Sustainably Chic, like Natalie. She is known for, putting together outfits with sustainable brands. And I think she's someone to look to because she has an amalgamation of tons of brands. And so that's a good place to start. And then there's kind of like platforms that are bringing in multiple brands. And if you find the platform that has the price point that works for you or kind of that style that works for you, that's another good way. You can listen to the podcast. There's a lot of brands that I feature and, people like you. I think it's like you just have to find the people that speak your language and have a similar style or something that kind of connects with you and follow them. And again, ask questions. If you're trying to find something, anytime people can reach out to me, I'm happy to answer questions. I get a lot of people that are like, I'm looking for shoes for a wedding. Where can I go? Or, whatever it might be. And I think the more we can help each other out, the easier this is.
I love the kind of communities that form around helping each other out. I think it's so exciting to see people, yeah, just and like I've got a little Facebook group and there's such an amazing group of people there. And I've actually seen some of the people in the chat who I know are part of the group. And someone will just post like, I'm looking for X, and a bunch of other people jump in and share brands and share places. And that is so cool for me to see, and something I love so much about like doing this online is meeting people like that. And like you said, that are in the same, you're kind of your tribe, your community.
Yeah. I mean, I used to know every single brand that existed out there that had some sort of social or environmental angle. Like not even like through and throughout, like anything connected to that. I knew all of them. But now I can't keep up. Like there's brands that launch all the time. And I think that's really incredible. And so the fact that I can constantly learn from other people because they have access to a different network, that's, I mean, I guess that's where it gets really fun, and you start realizing that this is changing, and you know, people are stepping up and building things that have more to say than just like, here's another fashion brand.
Yeah, for sure. It's so exciting. So I like along those lines, who have you, I mean, I hope this question doesn't like put you on the spot or anything, but are there any guests that you've had that you've just been super inspired by and that you think are doing really amazing things?
Yeah. So Mara Hoffman, I think her story is really powerful because she was a brand that grew as a traditional fashion brand has in the past and still does. And she didn't really know about like what was going on behind the scenes. She kind of just did what were the next steps. And then when she realized what was going on and that she was making a negative impact, she like broke down and was like, we have to change everything. And I think a lot of brands, when they realize that, they just kind of sweep it under the table and don't want to deal with it. And so I find that very admirable when a larger brand is like, we have to address this, and I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to say, I don't have it figured out and I have to learn. And I think as a consumer, as a shopper, for me to hear that, I'm like, wow, I respect you so much more because you're telling me the truth right now. And I think more and more we all want to know the truth. We don't want to be like, you know, I just heard a story on NPR the other day about brands and how we used to be like so connected to brands, but we're losing that. And as shoppers, like we're becoming less connected to big brands because we don't trust them. And we have to find ways to trust the brands or the people we buy from in all areas of life, not just clothes. So I think Mara Hoffman is really amazing, and I definitely look up to her and what she's doing. Yomi Abiola is someone who is doing very cool things when it comes to fashion, and she had an organization called Stand Up for Fashion, and talking about inclusivity in the fashion industry. And I loved that chat because it was like a humbling one for me where I had to just listen and learn. And let's see, I loved chatting with Andrew Morgan because he's just such a cool guy, and he just like is so, again, honest when he communicates, and it really comes through. And I think audio, it comes through so much because you can sense someone's voice, how much they're telling you the truth. And I'm sure some people are really good actors, but in general, I feel like you can kind of feel someone's approach through audio, and there's something really cool about that.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you, actually. And I just, I think it's so exciting, or it makes me feel so good when a brand is saying, you know, this is what we're doing, but, you know, we're not perfect and we really want to improve this and we're working on this. And like that kind of approach really gives me a lot of confidence in a brand, than a brand that kind of portrays this image of them being totally perfect and doing everything right. I think it's wonderful when brands acknowledge that, you know, they still have work to do and there's still things that they want to keep improving. And it makes me feel a lot better about, you know, trusting them, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like one of my recent podcasts is with a woman from Swedish Stockings, and they make nylons and tights from recycled nylon, pre-consumer textile waste. And for me to hear her say, she's like, this isn't the best solution. She's like, we want to be able to recycle nylon and like from people's past tights or nylons that they had, but we can't do that yet because we can't separate the spandex from the nylon because that technology hasn't been developed. But she's like, at least we're doing this, and they're collecting people's old tights, and they figured out a unique way to kind of like downcycle it. And they use it in like grease traps for restaurants.
Oh, wow.
It's like repurposed to be utilized in such a random and, like she said, not sexy way, but they're using it and it's not going to landfill. And so I think also it's about being able to think, okay, well, this is maybe not the best solution right now, but this is the better solution. And so it's better to do that than do nothing.
Yeah, for sure. And to have that idea of like keep trying to improve things and always trying to grow and get better.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, you can't just keep doing the same thing. Everyone gets bored, number one. And also we keep learning more. So it's like Tom shoes. When Tom shoes came out, it was like, wow, this is the coolest idea. And then people started critiquing it because they're like, well, why aren't you investing in the communities that you're giving the shoes to? Why aren't people making shoes there? And families able to then give shoes to their own kids, not have you just drop them down on. So I think that we have to keep being open to change because we're all learning. And as we learn, we have to kind of pivot and adjust.
And I think we do the same thing as consumers, right? Where you learn one thing and you try something, or you maybe decide that you're going to start buying more clothing in a thrift store. And then maybe you also buy from a sustainable brand. Like you constantly learn and grow and find different options. And I think it's so good to approach it with the attitude of, I'm never going to be perfect, but I'm always going to try my best and keep trying to find different options and keep learning.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're actually coming up on an hour already, which is crazy.
Wow.
But there is... Okay, so there's one more question that we'll get to in the chat. And Allie Irving says, is the ethical community more critical of each other not coming up to scratch with their efforts?
I think that's a great question. And I think I've read from a lot of friends who are bloggers that is a challenge, because when you put something out there, it's an open space for people to critique it. And the thing is I don't think that gets us anywhere. I think having constructive conversations and helping each other learn and grow is positive, but just pushing people down isn't getting us anywhere. And I think there's elements of that in this conversation, but I try to ignore it as much as possible, in all honesty, because I would rather like celebrate the good things. And it's kind of like just everyday life. When people say things to you like that, it doesn't help anything. So I think we all have to be critical of what's going on around us and try to do it constructively if we find things that, don't reflect our values. But then it goes back to, this is an individual experience. Like what you wear and what you buy is very personal. And so, what I think is important to me might not be the most important for you. And I think we all have to kind of remember that also when we're being critical of what's happening around us.
Totally, yeah. I think the way I sort of like to approach it is, I think we should all look at like what good we can do instead of like trying to like reduce harm or like not do bad things. And it seems like sort of the same mindset. But if you look at it like, oh, this is a good thing. Like it's, you're shopping local and maybe it's also a sustainable material, and like kind of trying to look at all the good things you can do and where you can focus your attention instead of like all the negative things that are tied into that. And I think it's so easy for people to jump on the negative things and said, like, oh, you bought this, but it's actually also this. And that just perpetuates this, like we talked a little bit about earlier, this very like negative approach. Because we're never going to be perfect, though. There's always something that you can critique or do better. So I don't know. It's difficult to balance, though, when it comes to like, how do you approach somebody about like, how do you, I guess, educate somebody versus like critique them? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a good way, if you're feeling like what someone is doing doesn't align with your values, ask a question, you know, about it. I don't think the best way to approach anything is you're doing this wrong and this is the better option. I think you learn a lot by asking questions. That's why I love having a podcast, because I don't always have the answers. There's a million things that I need to learn about this industry, but you can ask a question and then you might learn something that the other person was actually thinking about that you didn't realize. You know, I think assuming that someone else is wrong is never like the best first approach.
Yeah, for sure. And that also allows you to see where other people are coming from, right? Like, and see where other people's priorities are and kind of the good that they're doing in a different way. But so we should definitely probably be wrapping this up. Thank you so much to everybody in the chat. And Kestrel, okay, so I know you always end your podcasts by asking your guest like, what we can do as people, and I would love to turn the question on to you. So like, what can we do?
I think this is the simple thing that I always say, but I think we can all keep asking questions and we can support people in the space. And we can do that by just simple acts. Like, let's say you find a brand that's doing something super cool. You can post about it on Instagram or Facebook, on social media. Those little acts actually can become really powerful. And I think it's about supporting people, and also like we don't tell people in the space that they're doing cool things enough, you know. So I've been trying to be better at that. If I see a YouTuber that's really awesome, or a blogger or a writer, I can say, hey, you're doing something awesome, or I love that post. You know, I think we need to support each other more and kind of push the conversation forward in a positive way.
That's so awesome. I love that. So again, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody joining us. If you guys haven't checked out Conscious Chatter, be sure, I'll link it down below. Be sure to listen to it. It's amazing. All right, guys. Thank you, Kestrel.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.